Shall we? So, welcome back, everyone. Thank you so much for coming back on time. I hope you had a nice a nice break. Let's get ready for our next session for today, titled Policy Frameworks at National Level, Opportunities and Limitations for Institutional Responses to Gender-Based Violence. And as pointed out in UniSAFE's European baseline of legal and policy frameworks, solid national frameworks addressing gender-based violence are crucial to establish effective institutional policies. So drawing on examples from Ireland, France, and the Czech Republic, this session will engage representatives from public authorities and academic institutions in a dialogue on what the national framework conditions allow or not, while addressing institutional needs. So this session will be followed by time for questions and answers from the audience, and online participants will be able to post their questions on slido.com using the code that will be shown later on screen. This session will be moderated by Marcela Linková. Marcela is a researcher at the Institute of Sociology of the Czech Academy of Sciences, where she directs the Center for Gender and Science. She's active in developing policy solutions for gender equality in research at the Czech and European levels, and has been involved in several European funded projects, including Gender Action Plus and UniSAFE. In UniSAFE, she led the team working on the mapping of legal and policy frameworks. So, Marcela, thank you for organizing this panel. We look forward to the introduction of your panelists and to this panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Ben, and good afternoon, everyone. It's really a huge pleasure to be here this afternoon and engage with this panel of policymakers from the national authorities and ministries and people who are responsible for gender equality and gender-based violence agenda at the institutional level. So I will first introduce the speakers so that you know who is here with me, and then I will introduce very briefly the panel and give it some framework. So as Ben said, we have three countries, Ireland, France, and the Czech Republic. So for Ireland, we have Suzanne Walker, who is the Senior Executive Officer for Ending Sexual Violence and Harassment in Higher Education at the Higher Education Authority in Ireland. We have Louise Crowley from the University College Cork, who's responsible for the bystander intervention there, but not only that. For France, we have Chloé Moore, who is a policy officer at the Ministry of Higher Education and Research in charge of equality, LGBTQI+ rights, and fight against sexist and sexual violence. We have Elizabeth Koller, who is the director of the Mission Women's Integration at CNRS. And for the Czech Republic, we have Lucie Viktorinová, who is the gender focal point at the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports. And finally, Pavla Špondrová, who's a lawyer, but also an ombudsperson at the Faculty of Arts at Charles University in Prague. So thanks for accepting to be on this panel. And now a few words of what we are trying to do here. In UniSAFE, we saw that while the interlinkages between what we have at the institutional level and national level is not clear-cut, we tentatively concluded that if you have a robust framework in the national environment, in the national system for higher education and research, there would be a tendency to have a more robust framework in place also at the institutional level. And this is self-explanatory, maybe not a big surprise, but it is really interesting and important to look at what the national authority framework does for the institutions, how it empowers the people who are responsible for the agenda, and how they can mutually reinforce each other. This goes back to the Velvet Triangle and all these concepts that we have where the femocrats or civil servants can gain power from academics, feminists, NGOs, and vice versa. And so it's really to look into how people in the institutions can work with the national authorities and how this may work or not. The choice of countries is also very deliberate. We have 2 countries that are really at the forefront of what we are seeing in the policies. Ireland and France. These are the 2 countries that have a very robust framework going back to the 7P model that we're using in UniSAFE. On paper, at least, they look brilliant. So we need to also learn what the thing that is on paper allows us to do. And then we have Czech Republic as a post-2004 new member state, which is not that great, but also not that bad. We started doing things. And so there's motion. And we want to hear from my colleagues what facilitates that motion. And still, of course, what obstacles are there. And this will also be the case for some of the other countries, not only France and Ireland, because, I mean, once we win the first implementation battle and get the thing on paper, we launch the second implementation battle, which is how to lift off the things that are on paper and make them work. And so this is what this panel is about. So I think without any further ado, I can launch into the first round of interventions. And I would like to start with Ireland and ask Suzanne about what is in place at the national level. And we will then go with France and Czech Republic. And then after that, we will have the institutional responses to how that is working, that national framework. Suzanne.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Marcela. And I just want to say thank you so much for the invitation to the HEA to join this panel, and huge congratulations to the UniSAFE team on such an important project. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I'm not the loudest person, so I'll just... Okay. Sorry. Sorry, so I was just saying thanks very much for the invitation to join, and congratulations to the UniSAFE team on such an important project. So my name is Suzanne Walker. I work for the Higher Education Authority in Ireland. So the HEA is the government agency in Ireland that's responsible for the strategic development of the higher education system. So our parent department would be the Ministry for Further and Higher Education, and we provide funding and we monitor system performance. And so my role is to oversee our policy framework, which is on ending sexual violence and sexual harassment in higher education institutions. And that policy has been in place since 2019. It was developed at the directive of the Minister of Education at the time. She convened an expert group. My colleague Louise here was one of the members of the expert group that developed that policy originally in 2019. So she's a great person to speak to the development phase. It's a very holistic policy. It adopts a whole of system approach, a whole of institution approach. It applies to all members of the college community. It sets out a strong vision and principles for action. But what is quite key, I think, and I wanted to mention about the policy framework, is that it sets out 15 outcomes that all higher education institutions are expected to implement. And this is what we use as our basis, I suppose, for monitoring progress against the implementation of the policy. And those 15 outcomes are centred around 4 key pillars. There are structures, so putting the structures in place. That includes assigning senior responsibility, putting in place a cross-institutional working group. There's a pillar on data and reporting mechanisms, a pillar on institutional policy, and a pillar on targeted interventions. So that would encompass awareness raising, training, education, support services, those kind of initiatives. And it's been so important and so enabling, I would say, to have this framework in place. It gives us such a strong mandate for everything that we do in this space and for further action. the HEA requests reports from all of the 19 institutions that we work with on the framework. We request annual reports from them. So we get a snapshot of, how the sector's doing, the strengths, the weaknesses, the learning, the good practices, where we need, we get a lot of feedback on where institutions would like guidance, further guidance, where they're struggling, all of that. So it's really, really helpful. Another area where I feel like it's been very valuable to have the framework in place is it's really enabled this collaborative approach. We have a common vision, it's a strong foundation, it's very holistic, and it has enabled that strong collaboration between institutions. So that's been really, really important. And it has enabled the dedication of funding from the department, and that's led to some very interesting sectoral initiatives as well. So I'm happy to talk more about that, but I'll stop there for now.
Thank you. And thank you to the organizer for the invitation. As for France, I think we're still a little bit behind compared to Ireland, but we do have made some progress over the years. And just to go back briefly to how the national policy came into being, it started in the 2000s, and as often it started with a high-profile case of sexual harassment involving a sexual PhD researcher and her supervisor. And as a result, as a reaction to that, there was a feminist advocacy coalition that really pushed for institutional policies, that pushed for just to raise awareness around sexual harassment and make it a public issue. And later on in 2010s, we saw a national policy taking shape. We had the first national survey as well on sexual harassment in higher education that helped and further legitimized the issue. We also had our first national conference in 2017 on the topic, and it was the first time that our minister stated that all institutions had to implement a specific unit to support victims. And in the midst of the Me Too movement, we also saw a lot of visibility of the topic, lots of feminist student organizations that called out university responses. So all of this background partly explained in 2019 that we the government adopted a law in France to make gender equality plan mandatory for all public institutions, so including, of course, higher education and research institutions. And in this gender equality plan, gender-based violence measures to fight, against gender-based violence are required. And in particular, all public universities have to set up a unit to support victims, to provide guidance, and they have to have a communication also as well around this unit. And so that was in 2019, and 3 years later, we had our first national sexual violence policy, a 5 years plan that came up with a budget, which was really important, a 14 million budget for 5 years, and is structured around 4 main objectives. The first one being to train all staff and students on the issue of sexual violence in higher education. We also had our second objective to continue to strengthen the dedicated units in universities, to make sure that all people are trained, that they provide the right resources, that we can have reports that come to the ministry, and we can gather the data on the complaints that are made. And also we have put an emphasis on communicating and prevention, so at the national level, but also at the institutional level. And finally, the fourth main and important objective was to support and promote student and staff initiatives through different call to projects on an institutional or initiative from association fighting against gender-based violence. And so we now have a well-structured and quite ambitious plan. You know, it's 21 measures and 4 objectives. It does establish a clear roadmap for institution, for actions that can be implemented. It helps to harmonize all the implemented measures. It also acts as a really important lever of action for all the officers and all the persons that are working in institutions and that try to implement and that can face institutional resistances. It's an important act of lever, and it is as well also for us at my department level within the ministry to remind our ministry that we do have this framework and that we need to continue ensure that there's an effective implementation of those policies.
Great, thank you very much, and we will go to Lucie for the introduction of where we are in the Czech Republic.
Thank you for the word and the mic, and thank you for the invitation. Well, Marcela already touched that fact that the Czech Republic is not on the lead. However, and I have to agree that the situation, the national framework is rather poor at the moment. However, it's much better compared to 2017 when we first started somehow to work around this topic, and it's still developing, so that's the good news. And let me just generally say that at the moment the framework means more or less symbolic and financial support level of this topic and of the universities. It's important to say that at the Czech Republic the legal system works on the base that the ministry actually financially supports the universities. However, they are very autonomous, and although they are obliged by the civil law to prevent discrimination at the workplace, so we cannot really command them to do specific actions, and they manage the human resources and the workspace by themselves, so we can actually only recommend. This might be something into our discussion today, because I would be really curious about how it works at Ireland and France. When we talk about the strategic symbolic level, so that's the place where it's happening, the support in strategic documents. We actually have a few of them on the level of the Office of the Czech government and also on the ministerial level. And that actually more or less touches the topic of prevention of gender-based violence, but it's just a little part of that. When we started to work on this topic in 2017, so it was actually based on the project finance from ESF that gave us some personal and financial resources, and that was very important because we had people that were placed at the ministry, and they were really doing only gender perspective at that specific departments of the ministry. So when it came to science institutions and high schools, universities, so we actually sent the recommendation to all the rectors of the state universities to take care of this topic, to do some steps to prevent this area, and we gave them a lot of good practices. We also included a detailed description of the procedure and so on. We also included this topic into the compulsory annual reports that every university must send every year to the ministry. And we started to analyze how to include this topic into the ministerial documents more. I have to say the response was not huge. Nothing was really happening at the terrain, and I think it more started to work, and the more responses came with the boost of the Horizon Europe that we already heard about today, and with the creation of gender equality plans. That was a very important moment. And also, of course, the first cases of gender-based violence started to be visible. A lot of NGOs and student actions took place, and there was the moment when it was happening. So right now we are more or less at the financial support of this area, but in detail we can talk about it later.
Thank you very much for these intro statements. So what I'm hearing is cases. When they come out, they may be the driving force. I'm hearing funding that is provided or is vital. And then in some instances, the changing policy framework. For some countries, it's the EU. For some, it's the national level. So I will now ask the institutions, the representatives of the institutions, to respond. And yeah, we can go from Louise for Ireland again. I mean, how vital was the change in the policy, particularly for you, and what it allowed you to launch?
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Louise Crowley. I'm a professor in the School of Law in UCC in Cork in Ireland. So this isn't really my job as such, but it has become my job. So I'm really glad to be able here today to tell you about the Irish experience. I think it's important to go back to before the framework was developed. So my research is in gender-based violence and intimate partner abuse from a legal perspective, socio-legal perspective. And before we had a framework, there were a number of academics around the country who were working in this area, and we attempted to collaborate. We would meet occasionally and try to progress the issue nationally through our institutions. But because we were working in a policy vacuum, it was all but impossible. We didn't have the backing of our institutions. We had no money. You know, it was what we were doing on the side as well as our own jobs. I was also involved in the ESHTA programme, which was mentioned earlier, which was EU funded. But again, these were small initiatives kind of operating in a vacuum as such. What happened then was that in September 2018, there was a high-profile reporting of 2 rape cases in the first week of term in my own university that got national profile. And as a result, the then Minister for Higher Education convened quite quickly, a town hall meeting and called every president of every institution in Ireland to attend, and there was 5 of us spoke. I was asked to speak because I had developed what we call the Bystander Intervention Programme in UCC in 2016. So along with the great work of Active Consent in NUI Galway, we were seen as the 2 educational initiatives, so we presented on what we were doing. What happened from that was that the expert group was established, as Suzanne said, and in April, we were given 10 weeks, and in April 2019, our framework was published, which was, as Suzanne has outlined, a document that set out the vision for a culture change across Irish third-level institutions. There had been a small bit of work done on prevalence, so we did have an idea of the big issue that we were facing. So it required all the elements that Suzanne has already mentioned, so I won't go through those again. But just to talk about the landscape that it then very quickly created. So parking COVID, which obviously stalled development, what it has done is that it has been an enabler for progress across all institutions in Ireland. And it means that no longer is there a geographical lottery. If you go to Cork, you can do bystander. If you go to Galway, you can do consent. But actually, both of those programmes now are in every institution in Ireland, supported by the HEA. There's a huge sharing approach, so we give bystander to everybody for free. Active Consent delivers for free across the country, and on top of that now, in terms of developing policies, reporting mechanisms, identifying appropriate members of staff, training champions, communications, raising awareness, we have a working group chaired by Suzanne, and representatives of the universities all attend on a regular basis, and we share what we're doing well, and we ask questions about what we're not doing well, and we learn from each other. So we can talk to each other individually then, but the network that it created has been so powerful. Now, up until 6 months ago, it was a number of us in each institutions, whether they were counsellors, whether they were student help, student office, whether they were academics like me, you know, whether whether they're working in the health centre. We were all doing our bit because we were really driven by this agenda. But now we have dedicated funding for a sexual violence framework manager in every institution, which is a senior role which will coordinate the implementation across the university. So I can take a step back and concentrate on my training initiative, and this will mean, and I know that Suzanne has set up a network for those managers to work together and allow for shared development. So I suppose a couple of things that has allowed people like me to retreat and focus on what we do. But the framework has meant that we share, and also I won't say we're competitive, but you can see what other people are doing and you can work to those aims. It's compulsory, which I think is critical. I'm a fan of compulsory, particularly even my own training, which isn't compulsory, because I know I don't reach the people who need it most. The people who come are those who are already engaged. And I think that it is something that should seriously be considered by all countries. And then finally, just to say, the framework has been inspiring for sectors throughout Ireland. So I now deliver training and speak to the framework in the medical sector, in the legal sector, and across private industry, where they're realising the importance of having a framework that sets out all of the priorities. And the reporting piece has meant that all institutions are accounting for themselves. And I know in our institution, that is, you know, unashamedly a driving force, because we have to report at the end of the year.
Fantastic, thanks so much. I think that maybe we will come back to this issue of the exchange, the mutual learning as well, and how vital that is in the systems. But first, Elizabeth, how does that sound, what you're hearing coming for CNRS?
Well, thank you very much, Marcela, for inviting me to this roundtable. So I would say also, national framework led really to a very important structural change. I mean, gender equality was really considered as an issue since 1990s, but, gender-based violence was always considered as something different. It was overlooked, sometimes covered up, but it was not included in gender equality. It was just for a few black sheeps, that's all. And so for the first time, it became legally mandatory to have especially a reporting structure and internal disciplinary procedures. This was very important, and so they were obliged to set such a structure. Okay, so there they hired 2 lawyers to deal with this. That's fine. And, what happened then? Well, it's opening Pandora's box. So what they thought is, especially we are a research organization, meaning we have starting with doctoral, postdoctoral students. So they always thought, yes, young students, you can have gender-based violence, but not among staff members and very famous researchers and 50 years old man. This doesn't exist, and I know him. It's a good colleague of mine. And then they're totally overwhelmed. And so there is sort of backlash now, because they are dealing with these procedures and they do it. But all what the prevention then, they said, we shouldn't talk too much about it. So yes, you can have some trainings, but don't make it compulsory. Please, yes, it can be some smaller training for a few people, but we don't need to advertise that we have now also training and different tools for awareness raising especially. And they didn't realize how structural this is. And so they, of course, it's mandatory to have this disciplinary procedures. They do it, but it's sort of secret. It's kept secret who is investigating, who is at the end. Some of them are punished. Sometimes I publish the name, not always. It's not mandatory, but sometimes I do it. Prevention and protection, this they don't really take into account, and the protection is so complicated. I mean, if you have especially doctoral student, postdoctorals, I mean, if it's the supervisor, you need to find another supervisor, or it's not always possible because it's so specific, the theme, and it takes months to investigate. And so this is a bit, I would say, the idea you really need the 7 Ps. And if it's considered only from a legal point of view, and Françoise was saying, yes, you don't change society only by law. And here you have a good example. So they say, well, we do, you see, law, it's prosecution. Prosecution is fine, they do it, but they see law as prosecution, and the other things that, well, we're doing enough, we have enough cases, and look, we're, so what we did, so it's really, we think, we set up a network of gender equality contact points, really in research teams, research units, smaller units. They're just colleagues of within the team. Ideally, we would like to have 2 contact points, a woman, a man, a junior, a senior. And so they get trained, but they're not in charge of reporting themselves, but sort of whistleblowers, and they can explain sort of, they can see also, well, this colleague, well, there seems to be a problem, she doesn't show up, or she's screaming, and then they can just talk to them. You cannot have everything from a centralized unit far away from the working place. That's not possible. So maybe it's specific because we're not a university, it's not single located, single place located, but really you need these persons to be contact persons, and because we all know to report it's very difficult for a lot of them. So and sometimes they don't even really know if it's really gender-based violence, and so I think it has to be linked to person within a team, person who are known by the others, and it's day-to-day work. It's really day-to-day work. That's very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please keep in mind the issue of backlash and the network. I will give the floor to Pavla now, but then I would like to come back to this and hear maybe also from Pavla can comment on this right away if you wish, but also then to hear from Ireland. I mean, the networking aspect seems to be very, very relevant there as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I was thinking how to be, or if to be too radical at the very beginning or not. And I decided already before you asked this now to be radical. So I wanted to start with the commenting that the topic of ombudspersons in the Czech Republic and kind of well-being is still a very sensitive topic in the Czech Republic. It's understood as activists, as woke, as something like neo-Marxist, which means in our Eastern European context something like undemocratical. We have to always try to show it's in reality it's helpful and bringing safety to all. It is not just something against somebody and pro anybody else. So it's hard, and I try to always show it also helps, or it can help people in power positions. So we are still in a phase of justification and setting a system of ombudspeople in universities, but at the same time in other working places, academy workplaces. And the understanding of the position of the concept is not only among universities or colleges, but it is the same story for ministries themselves. So we have to search for allies, and I know how it is hard also for Lucie. So we are somehow trying to change the view on this, but it's not very easy because somehow it's we are weak in our positions because we don't have enough money, we don't have enough capacities to ask for money. It's complicated to show us how should we write a project, how should we work on collaboration. So, and I would have only, I don't want to be too long, so I have a few comments, then maybe just sentences, and then we can discuss this later. Charles University is the biggest and oldest in the Czech Republic, but in spite of that, or maybe because of this, framework is very fragmented and not development. I mean the framework for ombudspeople or this well-being content. So maybe I have it here, maybe say more or less it's not existent. We have 4 faculties and there are 4 contact persons in each. But sometimes it's an ombudsperson, sometimes it's somebody from personnel office, sometimes it's a vice dean, sometimes it's a kind of teacher, and sometimes even they are students in one of the faculties. So at this point, it's very hard to cooperate, to learn from each other, because the system itself is very, very different in each of the institutions. And what is last but not least, the thing is that it very much depends on political will of the chair, of a dean, how he or she wants to promote these activities. And sometimes, and I have a luck, and this is the reason why I'm staying there on this place still. I'm not there as long, I'm there a year and 2 months, because my dean is very willing to work with me on the framework. But in different faculties, it's much worse. They somehow don't think they need it. For instance, medical faculty, they think like there is everything okay. We don't have any victims. We don't have any complaints. So nothing is happening. That's the reasoning. And so I am example of good practice, but it's at the same time very frustrating, because we have altogether 8,000 people, 7,000 of students, 1,000 of people, employees, and my working hours are only day and a half per week. And that's all Ombuds office, that's everything. I have one, how to say it, stagiaire. So it helps a little bit, but not very much. And we have kind of system, but it is very fragmental. We have psychological counseling, we have deans for specific groups of problems, but it doesn't have system. And so the work and the activity itself is precarious. And from my point of view, this is so important to know. And at the same time, more or less, very often we are women at the place, so we need to reconcile, we need to fight for ourselves, to speak loud, and all other stereotypes. So it's very complicated, but I hope later to show what all, despite of this, can be done.
Thank you very much for this bleakish picture. I don't want to say completely bleak, but I think that we are hearing also the huge impact of project-based funding versus the institutional support coming from the national authority. So I'm turning to you if you have any reactions to what you are hearing so far, anyone, so that we don't go in rounds. I saw, Louise, you were putting down some notes. Don't know if you want to comment on any of these.
Okay, just a couple of things. There was a mention of universities' fear of highlighting it, fear of advertising the fact that you were doing this work, and fear of it being made mandatory. And I think what's fair to say in Ireland, and certainly in my experience when we developed bystander intervention training, which by the way is to educate and empower our staff and students to recognise and be aware of all forms of problematic behaviour, and to learn to feel a sense of responsibility to do something about it, even though you're a bystander, and then to have the skills to know how to act safely and effectively, and to avoid confrontation where possible. So in developing that, what has been really interesting is that never once have we had a media piece saying, oh, there must be a problem with sexual violence in UCC. There has been an embracing of the initiative by the sector and by the media, and UCC is recognised now as a safe place to send your children because they acknowledge the reality. And there was also, I think it was just said here about the medical school who thinks they don't have a problem, which of course is a nonsense with respect. And I think that in Ireland there has been a huge recognition, sadly, a huge recognition and acceptance of both the prevalence and the severity of the issue, not just at third level, but across all sectors and all society. So there is no hiding from it. And so what has happened is that working in this area has become a positive thing for a university to do. And I know that there are, so I'm in some secondary schools, so second level schools across Ireland, and I know that at their opening nights for kids coming in at age 12 and 13, they announce the fact that they deliver my training as a reason to send your child to school. So I think that's really positive. Also, I think it was important to mention that it's really important that the university, you talked about the criminalisation of these acts, and I know historically in Ireland, if there was a report in a university, they'd say, oh, that's a criminal matter, go to the Gardaí, go to our police. But now I think with the framework, there's been a real recognition of the role of universities, their obligation to look after their students, and that there needs to be other pathways for reporting besides a formal complaint. And then just otherwise, I wanted to say that something I picked up on was that in having a framework, what we have is a harmonised approach by all institutions. So it's not piecemeal or ad hoc, but actually everybody has to go on the same journey and get to the same end goals. And the autonomy of the university that was mentioned, whereby some universities are for it, others are quiet, that autonomy has been removed in Ireland. You have to, your funding is dependent on it. You can't decide, I'm not doing that part of the framework, you have to do it. And so I think all of those elements have allowed us to all move positively in one direction, and there's great, it's not perfect, gosh, I don't think it is, it's not perfect, and there are some areas that are slower, but the momentum I've seen in the last 2 years compared to the 7 years of headache I had banging my head off a wall when it was really difficult, it's been incredible. Yeah.
Anyone else wants to comment? No? So maybe we can, yeah, Elizabeth, please.
Well, it's also a problem, well, who is in charge of implementing these policies? And basically it should be inclusive. Well, we more or less have now gender equality offices, but very often it's really scattered. You have, well, lawyers, human resources, external services, psychologists, then you need maybe communication officers for and this is very difficult because they're not working together always, and that's because it's really such a problem, global problem, and for us it's a bit difficult because it's hard to say, well, you are in charge of implementing this policy. No, part of it, it's human resources, legal. So I think it's what you were saying also. That's a bit difficult, but well, we will succeed, I hope. But it needs some time, and so.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, please go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think what's been quite helpful in the Irish experience is that we have specific outcomes in our policy framework related to the structures and institutions. So the first outcome is around assigning senior level responsibility for implementation of the framework. So all the institutions have assigned that, and it's published on the website. So that's been very valuable. And there's also an outcome related to establishing quite a high level cross-institutional working group that meets on a regular basis to have oversight over implementation of the framework and to drive it. And I think that's been really, really critical because that supports that whole of institution approach, because you've got representatives from different departments right across the university representing staff and students. So that responsibility is not all falling on one person. So I think that's been really, really helpful. So I just wanted to comment on that.
So what was the reception of the national policies overboard? I mean, you are doing evaluation already, or monitoring and evaluation of the policies. So how did the institutions overall respond, and especially the management? Because, I mean, what we are seeing in UniSAFE is that the management of the institutions is critical to making this happen. So thoughts on this? What are the lessons learned? Things that you might do differently if you were doing it, time over? What has worked? You can continue if you wish.
I'm not sure if I'm the best person to speak to it because I've only been in post for 1.5 years, so I wasn't around at the time that the policy was first being implemented. But you mentioned resistance there and backlash, and in my role, I don't know if it's because I don't know if it's reflective of what's happening in institutions. I'd say there is probably, it's more of a challenge in institutions, but I have not experienced much backlash, but just a lot of support. And I think that's largely because of having the framework in place. It's kind of led to that acceptance, but also the fact that we did these quite large national surveys with staff and students, so the data is there, and it's just, it can no longer be denied that it is this really, really huge problem. But there may be more subtle forms of maybe resistance and backlash in place. I think there's quite a lot of fear, and there's quite a lot of paralysis in some cases around some issues. So in a way, it's like passive resistance. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed, and it comes through quite a bit in reports, particularly when it comes to reporting mechanisms, collation of data, reporting data, that kind of thing. And that's where the kind of expertise and the recruitment of specialist staff can be really, really helpful. So we just have this recruitment process ongoing at the moment in Ireland, where we've got funding for specialist managers in each institution. So we're very excited about that, and ask us in a year's time how it's had an effect.
Well, you know, as I explained in France, since 2019 we have a mandatory gender equality plan, and since then all the public institutions have responded, and they sent their plan, and they've have now a 3-year plan, gender equality plan. And my colleague is in charge of coordinating this part of our policy. She's in charge of collecting annual reports, but really on the just making sure with the monitoring committee that the plans are legally conform, but doesn't give a qualitative assessment of what's being implemented really, and so I think this is a difficult part at the moment. Is there are in all public universities a dedicated unit for victims, but we don't know if there are safe and effective services. We're still we're trying to really put forward resources for trainings. We have trained more than 3,000 staff members, people that are gender equality officers, that work in legal departments, HR, on to really give them all the necessary tools to understand how disciplinary system works, the difference with the criminal system, how to to just listen to a victim, etc. Really on this side, but it's still not enough for us to assess how effectively the gender equality plan is implemented, and of course it's not enough for us to even measure the impact of the policy. And we do lack the monitoring and evaluation tools, so it's something we're working at the moment. We're also working on how to develop a reporting mechanism just to collect the data, because again we don't have data on what's happening in terms of reports in all universities. And also one of the concerns that we have is that we have more than 2,050 public and private institutions. Lots of them have different statuses. They are also under supervision of other ministries. So and we're only 2-3 people in our department to coordinate this policy. So it also gives you an idea of the material resources that are put at the ministry level to coordinate this policy. So we're trying our best to really develop and make sure that at least those plans are adopted, that there are people in place. We do coordinate a network of gender equality officers, make sure that they all have the resources, that we can be here as resources, also reference point, contact points in the ministry, but we are still yet in the middle of developing this monitoring evaluation tools. We have there is an independent council that is in charge of doing the evaluation, of those plans, but the evaluation are carried out every 5 years, so it's still ongoing. And so for the moment, it's really a work in progress for us. And also, I also want to mention something that I think is important to have in mind is just we're also impacted and we're dealing and adjusting to the structural reforms that are taking place in the higher education and research, reforms with autonomy of universities and the fact that there are new structures that are always being created, association of universities. So again, it's also a question of how the policy can be put in place, who is in charge of doing what, and so this needs to be really reactive and quick to adjust to this evolving complex environment.
Thank you very much, and Lucie wants to react too.
Yeah, thank you. I would just add something about the evaluation of the compulsory annual reports from the universities, because that's basically the only thing we can evaluate at the moment. And we already see there's a huge change when we compare 2017, the first reports about this topic, and 2021. It's actually evaluation based through National Contact Center Gender and Science. And there's definitely a big change. In 2017, for example, out of 26 universities, there was no ombudsperson, not on any of them. At 2021, there were everywhere except 2 universities. So that's a big thing. But still, we see that the reports that we actually ask for are not perfect at all. They are not detailed enough, and they also actually report about the university as in general, but not about the faculties, as actually Pavla already mentioned, and that can vary very much. The reports also don't show how many cases were on the table that year, how many cases were reported, what were the cases, and so on. We are not actually able to evaluate or specify what is the effectivity and quality of the tools that are at the universities. So we are not sure if actually the universities report everything what they do. So there's a big bag of problems, but I think we can really work on that. However, I think what's the biggest problem is that the reports are not linked to, for example, any like financial reward or some resources that would motivate in the same way like the gender equality plans, for example, from the Horizon and so on. And my personal evaluation also, if I can add, is that I can see that in the ministerial documents, when I look at the terms that we use, so in 2017 when I came to the ministry, so it was almost forbidden to use the term gender. So everything that was gender had to be equality between women and men. So right now we are allowed to use the word gender, and it's much better. I can like use it quite freely, although I still have to explain what it means, which I always go for. And but I also see at the moment that when we talk about the gender-based violence, so what we use, we don't use at the documents gender-based violence term. There is the maximum is sexual violence. So I think that's a very important thing, and you can see it's mirroring the situation basically. And one important thing what I see is that for the ministry, the team is not only, of course, the team of the environments of the universities, but we have to think about the whole educational system that is so interlinked, and I'm afraid that we don't have really like good mechanisms at place to recognize and therefore prevent and resolve the presence of gender-based violence on lower educational levels, like primary schools, high schools. That's at the moment the prevention there is not specific and focused on gender-based violence, and I really feel this needs to be somehow secured, and we have to pay attention to that.
If we have time, I just wanted to follow up on there's been a few mentions of monitoring and evaluation, and also very conscious that Ireland is also often put forward as a country that's made an awful lot of progress, I feel like an awful lot of progress has been made, but at the same time it still feels like we're at the very early stages in many ways. And I think one area that really we need to improve on is the monitoring and evaluation at every level. So we do receive the annual reports from institutions, but there's a lot of inconsistencies, and I think there's a lot of improvement that can be made to define like very smart outcomes or smart indicators, and I think that is an area that would be really helpful to get support from the likes of the UniSAFE project. And just to mention as well that so many of our institutions have just developed dedicated policies or are in the process of developing dedicated policies. So they're at that very, very early stage of policy implementation, and I think there's a risk that, you know, there's been a lot of work put into these policies. They're very comprehensive. There's been a lot of consultation, some of them 2 years in the making, that they'll just be exhausted when actually the work really starts, when you put the policy in place, and there was very little mention or feedback coming around how they're going to be implemented, how are they going to be resourced, how are they going to be monitored. And those monitoring mechanisms need to be put in place at the outset, and they need to gather baseline, you know, so that they can track. So that's just, and also just related to that really quickly, I think we need to leverage our capacity as research institutions a lot better, because we're lacking in the research and the research around what works and what kind of indicators should we be setting, what actual objectives are we aiming for with our awareness raising, with the education, with the training, you know, at that sort of medium term level. I think that's another gap.
Thank you very much for this brilliant transition to the closing part of the talk with the way forward, the things that still need to happen. So I would just now like to ask all of you if you could reflect on what was the most important thing that facilitated the development, and what you see as the critical aspects that you have not mentioned yet for the way forward. I think that we have heard also about the importance of student initiatives and mobilization, so perhaps if you could reflect on that as well. So, Pavla, since you have the mic in your hand, can you go ahead?
Okay, I can try. The movement which happened in the Czech Republic, I think, very closely is connected with the movement of Me Too. It somehow made people to think about this problematic differently, and we had not very so many people, so many women openly, freely speaking about their experiences, but also we had let's say famous women speaking loudly, and at the same time this movement started kind of movement also somehow under. So it developed, not 100% connectedly, but of course it is connected. A few also legal cases or cases in the universities. We had one case of predator behavior in Faculty of Arts, which really somehow made the soil for making the ombudsman position be put in place, because it was one of the election points of current dean. And it was, I think it was one of the cases which was really solved very correctly and successfully, because the person was forced to leave the university, the faculty, but at the same time it was very tough and hard, because it was really very close to the, it could be probably, when it would go to the criminal court, it could be understood as a rape, this behavior, but it was not reported to the police. The victims were anonymized. So even the people who were solving the case didn't know the exact personality, the exact identity of these people. But we had also one court case concerning a very well-known, very young member of a parliament of the Czech Republic, who was also very, very much connected with the university level because he was very active in the faculty of law. And he was now, but it is not yet done because it was already appealed, but first level court decided he committed rape on 3 people. So this made a big amount of discussions, and it opened really the level changed the level of understanding of this, and also it has bring big discussions about the definition of rape, of course, even in the Czech law. So it's now discussed, and it's brought to the government now, the change of the definition also, and it was brought at the Faculty of Law and generally at the university level. It was brought by students, by their movement. The appeal, the ask, please, you have to somehow systematically deal with these situations. So they are very active, and my point of view is I want to cooperate with them. We have regular meetings, we discuss, but at the same time I don't want to put the emphasis on students because they are the weaker part of the system. I don't want to make them responsible to report, to ask for action, because it should be from the responsible from my point of view is the institution. So we need to know what they need, but at the same time the responsibility is from the institution. So and they are changing, of course, because they are leaving, they are going to Erasmus, they are somehow not interested at all because something what was their personal, it's done, it's solved. So we cannot focus or put the responsibility on them. So this is from my point of view. But it was important, this movement, and they are active still, and they have workshops and discussions. And the last thing is about the school platform, or should I say it? Should I say it now, or maybe later?
We're really short on time.
Yeah, we have also what from my point of view is important. We have kind of liaison. Cooperation among Ombudsperson, among all the Czech Republic, and we now work on making association of people doing this stuff. And next week I'm going with that to the regional court to register this association. So. And it helps very much because we share the feelings, we share the good practice, we can make interventions, which is very, very helpful. What we were doing it informally, but this will make another frame. So I hope it will also help us to get the money from Lucie and the others.
Okay, Chloe and Elizabeth.
Yeah, well, regarding student mobilization and more generally women's movement, I think this is key, of course, because historically speaking, this has been the trigger for implementation of gender equality policies, and we've seen it more recently with our national policy. What was at the trigger for this national policy was first student mobilization surrounding, cases of sexual violence in Sciences Po, which led to the hashtag Sciences Po, and then we had working groups at the ministry level, impartial investigation that have been made that led to the development of a national 5-year policy. So this is definitely an important aspect, but I think a second thing that is key for developing, implementing a national policy is to sustain trusting relationship with a different set of actors on the ground, and specialized associations that do have the expertise that can help gather the data on the ground and that further legitimizes the issue, but also our network of gender equality officers with whom, and one of my colleagues was representing the network is here today. We have close relationship, and they help us, do surveys on the sexual issue of gender equality in higher education. They share, you know, best practices, and there are different set of actors with whom we have that help us, you know, push forward the national policy.
Elizabeth?
Yeah, just a few words. Yeah, I think, well, if you want to end gender-based violence, we not only need, of course, a legal framework, but it's a real cultural change. And there, I think we need also the involvement of men. Well, men can also be victims, not only prosecutors. Well, prosecutors can be also men for them. But I'm quite optimistic. I think the young generation of men, at least ones who are interested in these topics, are really involved, engaged, and so I think it's the only way, because our top management is still male-dominated, and they trust more in men, and so if we have also advocating men, it would really help. So that's, I think it's important. Well, it's great. All my colleagues, we are all women. Maybe next time we could have also, let's say, 20–30% men would be great, because it's a common issue. I mean, it's that's a bit more. But I'm rather optimistic because I see young generations really have different mentalities. Not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah, and just on that, I'm a big believer that men listen to men. So if I'm in a room with 100 men telling them, you know, what is sexual violence and how they can prevent it, and if their friend was to pull them on their behaviour, I think they're far more likely to check themselves. So I think men actually can be incredible advocates and very powerful. Just a couple of things to say in terms of commenting on where we've come from. I think that what has been a key driver in Ireland is the humanising of the tragedy of sexual harassment and violence, and people listening to and realising that the stories they hear in the newspaper articles they read, they can really relate to them, that it could be them or it could be somebody they know, and the shock that people have experienced has been a real driver for change. And I think in Ireland we've seen a developing social contract of everybody has a role to play, and this appetite for change, I get the sense, I deliver training across all sectors, and there's a real desire for knowledge, understanding, capacity to recognise, an ability to do something about it, an ability to realise what's happening if you are a victim, unaware of the severity of the behaviours. And I think as educators, and I think this would be an important point to finish on, as educators, that we play a critical role, because education and knowledge is the foundation for all change. And I find that in delivering my workshops that there is an awareness that, well, there's a level of ignorance amongst young people and older people. It's a cross-generational issue of what sexual harassment and violence actually looks like, and everybody can identify rape and sexual assault, but they miss out on so much that they let pass, or they let you normalise, because they think that's just the way it is. You know, a student has said to me, oh, I was in a nightclub and I was groped, but of course I was groped, I was in a nightclub, and they just take that as a given. So that information piece is critical for all of society, but I think that as long as we continue to educate our staff, our students, and our students are huge ambassadors for this and huge advocates for this, I think we can get to a better place. I think our vulnerability perhaps lies in continuing the priority that is given to this. So at the moment we're doing really well. The government leadership has been a complete game changer, but we need that commitment to stay. So we now have institutions that are all committed and are funded, but this needs to stay high on the agenda. So it's really critical that it stays high at a government level so that we can sustain the progress on the ground.
Thank you very much. And Lucie will have the closing.
Yeah, thank you. I will make it short. I would just love to find myself in a situation where the top political level declares gender equality and no acceptance of gender-based violence as one of the tops, and they would make it a political priority. And also it would be great if our work would be taken seriously, and we just know that it's leading somewhere, and that we have the resources dedicated to this area.
Finishing not on a totally positive note, but I will open the floor with these 2 questions. We have about 25 minutes for questions to our speakers. Thank you very much for sharing what has worked and the challenges that continue. And I'm sure that we have not covered everything that we have prepared to speak about, but I'm sure that some of that can be said also in the discussion. So we can open the floor now to questions.
We could try voicing our questions without a microphone. You want to and
better on here. Thank you for to the panel. Great discussion across different locations and contexts. I'm really struck by the Irish context and the collaboration you've managed to talk about, Louise, between universities. And I heard your qualifier on it, Suzanne, that it's early days, the policies need to be supported and implemented and assessed. But what is it in each context that's the most helpful things in sustaining collaboration and cooperation between the universities, rather than what we see in particularly the England context, where there's a density of universities, so there's competition for students, and that is what's undermining collaboration. What are the big factors then, do you think, supporting collaboration? And is it mandating it? I know you made a comment about that.
It's driven by personalities. So, I mean, these networks were set up either before the framework or in the early days of the framework. So it was all people actually, personally driven by this agenda, who weren't being paid to do this work. It was on top of what we do, desperate to see things better, to have a platform for staff and students to report, to learn all of those issues. And I actually think that it comes from a position of generosity and a desire for change and a desire to ensure that geographical lottery doesn't exist. So if my child goes to UCC, they'll get a great education, but if they go up the country, they don't. And that might sound a bit, I don't know what the word is, simplistic or naive, but it's actually true. And I know I have colleagues here from several institutions in Ireland, and I think they'd agree that it's just really decent people really wanting to see change. There isn't a competition. So as I said, with my bystander program, people started getting interested. So we have it on an EE platform, and we just gave it to everybody for free across the third level sector because I wanted it to reach everybody. I didn't mind. I don't claim copyright in it. It actually was inspired by Rachel Fenton's work in England, and so it's and equally Rachel gave it to me and said, knock yourself out, and I Corkified it and made it for our audience and shrunk it and changed it, and it's completely evolved now. But it all comes from that ethos of we have to make the world a better place. So that might sound a bit Little House on the Prairie-esque, but but it's actually it's true, and I don't think there's any competition in what we do. And so, for example, we struggled with our policy. We really did. Our legal, with respect if they're watching, our legal department were horrified, afraid of investigations, different things like that. So we worked with 2 other institutions in Ireland. We're still working with them, and we shared our bits and their bits, and together we've all come to a place that we're comfortable. And it was literally, what are you doing? What are you doing? This is what we're doing. And we all collaborated and got to where we needed to get. And that is across all of the elements of the framework, I'll be honest. And it's brilliant. Yeah.
I'll just add really quickly to that. I completely agree with what Louise said. I think it really has relied so much on the voluntary commitment of so many people, but I think that needs to change. We're far too reliant on the dedication and the commitment of people who work in this area, and so many people are burning out. So we need, and I am concerned with the kind of the burden that we place as well, I think, on a lot of staff, say, receiving disclosures and things like that. But that has driven it a lot. I think it's also to do with we've a lot of the funding we often provide for sectoral initiatives, and it can be a condition of funding that institutions need to collaborate, and it is that shared vision and that kind of common approach as well. But also, there's such a huge appetite to collaborate as well. So I think you find that if you set up meeting spaces, working groups, conferences or whatever among practitioners, there's a massive appetite to collaborate, because it is a difficult area to work. It's not black and white, it's complex. A lot of people feel isolated, and that peer support is very, very valuable. So I think there are some of the factors.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it rings so much bell. Protecting the mental health and well-being of the people responsible, because and it's so ineffective for the institutions to lose the people through burnout or just not going. So I think that at the institutional level, I think recognizing this, that it's a resource that we need to nurture also is so important. I saw some other hands. Yep, it's still going back there.
We will have this question just after a question from the online participants, because we won't remember. As a reminder for all of you who are following us online, you're invited to post your questions on slido.com using the hashtag 3376295. So there's one question saying, are there plans to make it compulsory for European funding applicants to declare if they have ever been investigated for harassment, like in the US? So I'm not sure who this question is for.
There are discussions. I cannot. Yes, I mean, yes, of course, it's something that we envisage. It's something that the U.S. National Science Foundation does. So, yeah.
Surely convicted rather than investigated. Anybody can be investigated. Prosecuted, but not investigated. Can we just say it would have to be prosecuted and not investigated because of if there was a false accusation, just to, from a legal perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much. I agree. It was a very, very great and a very interesting panel. Just the question for the representatives of the institutions. I mean, I would be interested in how is the uptake of the policies from for the lack of a better word, basically the end users. I mean, do you feel with all the time that these policies are slowly implemented, that the institutions are getting, I mean, I don't want to ask for a number of cases or so, but for example, that the institutions are getting more routine in becoming more secure? Is it becoming easier for the victims basically to come forward to use all of these policies?
Our policy isn't finished yet, so.
Okay.
You're really right to ask this question, because we're doing it for the end users, as you're saying. Maybe it helps. You know, it's very difficult for a victim to report, and the more there are, maybe it's easier for them. But but of course, it's not very satisfying. I mean, we would really like to change the culture, to have it's well-being at work, that should be the actual issue, but we're far from that. But yes, I think if you know somebody who reported, how did it happen, because it's sort of a black box, you don't know, well, if I'm report, what's going to happen afterwards, and what are the risks? So in that sense, yes, but it's not enough. It's not enough.
Yeah. I think
it's always difficult.
I think it's fair to say that certainly our new policy, it sets out from the start to the end, whereas up until now, you made your report and you had no idea what was going to happen next. But now we have real clarity about who you'll talk to depending on which way you report, and what the steps will be, and what will the other person's involvement be, and all the interim measures that can be taken. So we're on from having it hidden in the dignity and respect policy for everybody to the specialised sexual harassment and violence policy. So I think straight away there's going to be clarity. It's shorter, it's much more accessible. So I would hope that it will be much more inviting, that's all I'd say.
I would add something, because we have an application which is called Don't Let It Be, or something like that, and students, but also employees can report there, and they can report also anonymously, and it goes directly to people who they know, to whom it goes. So it goes to Ombudsperson, to Vice Dean, to Dean, and student counselors too, which are known who they are, and we are obliged to work without saying who the person is, and we are driven by the let's say mission, or the value of the person who is asking for help is the person who is deciding what is going to happen with the case. So I always, mainly I'm the contact person who meets with the persons, with the people, and we discuss what are the expectations, and we have the routine, the way it's the way is described on the internet. Be very close to the information about the application, so they know how it works. And of course, because the system is not used in all of the faculties, it's used only in 2 or 3 from 14. And of course, it depends how you inform students about the system, because very often they don't know it's on place. So it depends on also transparency and ability to get to the students. So we need to make meetings with them, workshops, to send this information through the units of the faculty itself, like unit of German studies, unit of historical studies, and I don't know. And the more they know how the system works, the more they apply, the more they ask for help, the more we learn, and the more we are precising the story, how they can proceed. So it's really working like this. It's really helping, and it's opening the space. And the positive and at the same time a negative thing on this is that the more we do this, the more appealance we have. The more overwhelmed am I, and the system cannot solve everybody on time. So it needs to get improved. So from next year, I had a promise that I will not be lonely, but we will be Ombudstandem from next year. So it somehow improves itself, but it depends on money, on resources, on ministry and stuff like that. But it's really helping, and it's widening. So I'm optimistic too.
We have another question from the online platform. So someone anonymous. Thanks for a fantastic panel. In the UK, we've seen an uptake in violence against non-binary or trans students. How best can we support them against anti-gender hate?
Can you hear me well? Thank you for that question. So part of my work is to coordinate the LGBTQA+ rights policy, and it's definitely more recent action at the ministry level. And one of the important feedback that we got from gender equality network of gender equality officers, and more generally from the students, is the issue of increased violence against trans and non-binary students and staff members, and they are definitely at the ministry level. We are trying to really put a lot of measures on this specific action, because most of the time there's the umbrella action I've taken more generally on LGBT+ rights, but do not take into account the specificities of trans and non-binary students and staff members. And so just recently we've just created a partnership with Specialized Association of trans and non-binary people that will be training or different set of actors in universities, in public institutions on how to prevent violence, how to make sure that name, pronouns, etc. are respected, and also facilitate procedures to change names at the university level. It's still a bit of a tricky issue also on the technical side, because it's it asks also interministerial work. You change name on the salary, the paycheck, etc. So it's we are trying to make efforts, but we do definitely identify the urgency of the matter, and we are hoping also that this is an issue that a topic that will be addressed at the institutional level. Although some of the feedback that we got from gender equality officers is that even when they try to implement measures, to organize conferences, there are a lot of backlash, and so sometimes they just cancel their events because there's some really important right-wing protests that can happen. And so we're also working with our the network of gender equality officers on how to help them and provide them the right resources against those backlash. So, yeah.
So just to speak from my own university, so in UCC, we have a long-standing UCC Staff Allies agreement, and so we all have these stickers, Proud Allies, and everybody in the university has a lanyard that is the rainbow lanyard, so it's incredibly visible across the university, and equally now with trans and non-binary students. And just last month we launched the equivalent for students, so it's about developing awareness for students. So it's again part of our training, including the bystander training. We incorporate scenarios referencing pronouns and other issues, and we had a big celebration for this launch of the student allyship, and a number of members of the Cork trans community came up, and we had basically a kind of a carnival on campus for the day. So for me, it's the education piece, which we have for staff and students, and then we also have the awareness piece, and we have badges for pronouns, and then also the university academic staff. We are encouraged to start our first lecture on every module announcing our pronouns and inviting people to announce their own and to have it on their student record. And we do have a system whereby students can request a change in their name and gender if they so choose, as can our staff. So that was pushed through governing body about 18 months ago. So at an institutional level, we have made a lot of progress in that, and it's very visible across campus. We fly the trans flag on campus, cyclically with other flags. So for me, it's about raising the profile and then creating the networks of support and underpinning it with education. But it is just to say that we also know from the Irish stats that people with disabilities, members of the LGBTQ+ community are much more, and trans are much more likely to be victims of sexual harassment and violence.
I was going to say something similar, and I think one initiative that we're implementing shortly is we want to fund some pilot initiatives, not just targeting trans and non-binary, but all kind of high-risk groups. I think it's an area that we need to strengthen, so we're hoping to really learn from those pilot initiatives. And also, I think the awareness raising, and I think this is where the bystander initiatives are really strong in tackling the kind of cultural norms that allow these kind of attitudes to perpetuate. So I think we need to maybe have those very well thought out, very targeted and considered awareness raising initiatives that really challenge those kind of social norms that allow that kind of violence to continue unchallenged.
I gave training, bystander training, to the students in the Law Society in Ireland last month. So these are trainee solicitors, and in one of the scenarios it was about pronouns not being respected, and there was 100 students in the room, and as I was leaving, a student came up to me and they said, I'm non-binary, and they had a badge, they, them, and they said, I think I'm the only person in the Law Society, and nobody knows about it, and nobody comments, even though I wear my badge all the time. And they said it meant so much for you to put that scenario on the screen, and the 100 people in the room in their groups of 8 discussed it, teased out why it was problematic, and talked about the interventions that they would make if they heard that comment. And I was so, well, first of all, I said I hope it was dealt with respectfully, and I hope that was okay, but they just said it meant so much. So I think there are great ways of raising awareness and starting conversations, and it's those peer-based conversations, I think, that will make a difference, rather than one person at the top of the room saying, you know, telling people what to do and what to say. Sorry, just
Pavla, you wanted to add?
I had pardon. I had one case concerning a trans student who came to me and asked about, or told me about the misgendering them, and we were somehow solving the case, and very often the cases are finished with the report, but sometimes when it is more systematic or general, it finishes with a kind of recommendation or something like that. So this finished also with the recommendation which was focused on communication with people, with LGBT plus community or people. And the thing is that it needs to be very well known among the students, among the people in the institution. And it's public, the recommendation is public. It was sent to the people from the high management from the university, or faculty, it was our faculty. And what very well works with me in the Faculty of Arts is the cooperation with the middle management, heads of departments, which are trained. It's not obligatory. It is voluntary, but it's very prioritized by Dean. It was said like, I would be very, very happy if everybody from you are going for this training. And through the training, it's communicated, and they are also bounded by the labor law. They are they have obligation to make their employees to respect values, laws, ethical code, I don't know what else. So they really have the responsibility because they are management, so they are also paid higher for that, and they very often don't know, and they don't know how to do it. They don't know what are the values. So it's step by step, and last but not least, the general institution should declare respect to these values, like say it loudly, to have it in the main website, and it helps, the transparency helps.
Yeah, I will just say that the ministry is actually at the moment creating some kind of methodology, because we see that this topic is on rise, but the methodology is more for the primary school and high schools, because we get lately a lot of questions how to be organized with this at schools. For example, questions about the toilets and organizing sports for the kids and so on. But on the other side, we also see a lot of backlash. People don't understand the variety of gender identity or gender identity as a term itself. So we really need something, some piece of paper that would be declaring support of this topic as well on the ministerial level.
We're reaching the frustrating part of this event where we have people want to carry on. We have many more questions, but in 2 minutes' time we're going to have our students at the front of the door waiting for the next session. So we had one question here that's been waiting from the beginning too. So may I suggest that we call for limited, maybe one reply?
Okay, I try to be brief too. Hello everyone, my name is Claudia Schredel. I'm from the Jesus Leibniz Institute for Social Sciences and part of the UniSAFE team. And I was wondering actually, and asking Susan and Louise about the survey data. You mentioned it played quite an important role in legitimating the further need for more action against gender-based violence in universities and research organizations. Have you experienced any backlash in a sense that it was methodologically criticized or questioned? Thank you. And thank you for the panel.
Again, I'm not the best person to speak to this because I wasn't in the role at the time, but absolutely I think there was.
Yeah, I mean, so because it was voluntary, there was an argument that those who were responding were much more likely to have been affected by the issue of sexual harassment and violence. But I think that's a challenge we've always faced with these surveys. But what it did indicate was the really high prevalence. And what I found anecdotally was people then were more talking about it more generally about the prevalence, not necessarily about specific issues, but there was a lot of nodding and agreeing that this did reflect the lived reality for people. So I think that fundamentally and inherently there are always weaknesses. I don't think the questions were particularly leading. I think they were very well framed.